Welcome back, everybody. Michael LaFido. Welcome to Luxury Specialist. You're in the right place. If you want to learn more about the industry and you want to increase your average sale price and you want to work smarter, not harder, from time to time, we have other top luxury agents or producers or strategic partners that service the luxury space. Today's guest isn't really a specialist in luxury, but I saw them recently at the T3 Summit in Naples, Florida. And literally, they were amazing. He was amazing, and he went against the grain. And part of what I teach agents is when everybody's going left, you go right. When everybody shows up with their iPad, you show up differently. And today's topic, unfortunately, isn't a sexy topic. We're talking about a class action possible lawsuit with, and so that's what we're talking about today. But most agents, unfortunately, have no clue what's going on and maybe what's coming down the pipeline. And so that's where I said to James, hey, would you mind jumping on, talking about this? Are you comfortable with it? So without further ado, I want to bring on the CEO of one of the major companies out there. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. It's called NextHome. James, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to discuss some things that necessarily aren't lead gen. They're not prospecting. They're not about necessarily making more money, selling more homes, but it's very informative. And that's what we're all about, is delivering a better experience for both the consumer and our fellow agents. And in this case, it's more informational. So first off, you're the CEO of NextHome. Tell everybody a little bit about NextHome, how many states you're in, how many agents are with NextHome. I'm putting you on the spot. You can speak in broad sense if you don't have the exact data.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you being having me on the show and being here. And thanks everybody for listening. Just real quick background. NextHome, we have about 615 offices across the U.S., almost 6,000 agents in the company. So I'm in the real estate space. I've been in the industry my whole life. Third generation. Grandfather started his company in 1967. So I've been doing this a very long time. And then the topic today that we'll go through that Michael's asked me to discuss is the class action suits that are happening, in our industry. Many people aren't even aware of them. So I'm going to talk about this from a simplistic version of explaining what they are, and give a little bit of background on where these are going and essentially what the outcomes might be. I did want to preface as just a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a CPA, and I'm not an insurance agent. So the views expressed are the views of James Dwiggins. If you have any questions, you need to talk to your own lawyer, CPA, and insurance agent to understand some of the things I'm going to talk about. So I guess you want me to kick it off, just kind of dive into what they are? Okay.
Yeah. So give everybody a very high level. For those just tuning in, they're listening, they have no idea about this lawsuit. Give everybody the simplified, 10,000 foot view of what's going on.
Okay. So there are 3 lawsuits technically that are happening. If you followed any of the headlines in real estate, there's 2 of them that are being addressed, but there's actually 3. So the first one is what they call No Select versus MLS Property Info Network. And then that's the defendant. The defendants also include they include Realogy, Berkshire Hathaway, Keller Williams, Remax, and then some additional smaller ones. There's a second lawsuit called Burnett, technically Burnett Sitzer versus National Association of Realtors. Again, defendants are Berkshire Hathaway, Remax, Keller Williams, Realogy, and some additionals, including the National Association of Realtors. And then the third, which is the biggest, is Morrill versus the National Association of Realtors. And again, the same defendants. All 3 lawsuits are very similar. I'm not going to go into every granular detail because it would take hours to explain them all. But the general premise of them is that they are alleging that there is a conspiracy in the industry to prop up commissions, that it is the industry has collaborated to do that by forcing sellers to pay the buyer's agent commission. I am simplifying here to be clear, but they are basically saying the conspiracy is these companies, these large real estate companies who are on boards and committees at NAR, boards and committees at MLSs, have collaborated to require a structure where the seller is being harmed by providing the co-op commission to the buyer's agent. So it started with two rules, basically. You have the buyer broker co-op agreement, whereby when you have a listing in the MLS, you have to offer compensation on the other side of the transaction. Now that can be $1, but technically you have to offer compensation. So if you think about it from that perspective, if you're one of the 4 largest real estate companies in the US that control, 50% of the industry, they're alleging it is in your best interest to provide this rule and enforce this rule, because theoretically a lot of the agents on the other side of the deal representing the buyer are or work for one of these firms. In other words, the conspiracy is you're creating these rules to make sure that there's compensation offered on the other side to pay the buyer's agent, which a significant amount of time would benefit your organization. So I'm kind of laying the foundation here. That policy's been in place for a long time. Where it got really difficult was when the National Association of Realtors instituted the Clear Cooperation Policy. The Clear Cooperation Policy is essentially the rule that was put in place that states if you are a member of the MLS, and you take a listing, you have to put it in the MLS within 24 hours. The reason that policy was enacted, which I agree with, was designed to make sure that sellers are benefiting from an open market, that their property is receiving the highest amount of exposure, and I'm very blunt about this, that there is not greed going on by saying, oh, I'll list your property and I'll also represent the buyer and it'll be easier and you'll get a better deal. The reality is, and I'm very direct about this, there is no better way to advertise a property than having it in the MLS, syndicated and opened up to the world for more offers. So the policy was put in place to essentially take these pocket listings that were benefiting certain organizations, keeping the properties in-house and providing a benefit to the seller. The problem is when you look at the policies separate from each other, they don't have any harm. But if you look at them combined and you say, you cannot take a property that when you're a member of the MLS and sell it off the MLS, you have to put it in the MLS. And there's a policy that states you have to provide broker cooperation on the other side. It doesn't look very good. It looks like an antitrust violation. Like you're conspiring to prop up commissions by saying everything must go in the MLS and you also have to offer compensation to the buy side deal. Now, there's a whole bunch of arguments as to why this is good for the buyer and seller, and I'm not going to get into those because I don't disagree with them. It's very hard for a buyer to come up with enough money as a down payment. It's hard for them to be able to pay for representation. It actually, if you go back in time, it used to be that they were separate. This is something that's been occurring to make it easier for a deal to come together. But this is instituted. This has basically caused all of the DOJ investigations that you've seen, comments about where they're looking at this as, does it violate the Sherman Act, which is essentially an antitrust claim. And so where we are today is you have 3 different cases. So you have No Select, you have Moral, which is the big one nationally in 20 different markets, and Burnett, which is in Missouri. All 3 of them fundamentally are suing, saying that the sellers were harmed because they were forced to provide commissions to the other side of the deal. So the damages from this would essentially be some percentage of the commissions that were paid to the buyer's agents over the course of a 5-year period. Because there's a statute of limitations on these claims. So if you think about this for a second, we'll just start with Burnett because this is the one that's occurring. This is class action status, meaning anyone can join the class that was harmed during the period of time. It goes to trial in October. It's in the state of Missouri. It's in federal court. Plaintiffs are suing for the commissions that were paid to buyer's agents over a 5-year period of time. If you think about that number, that could be quite significant, like billions of dollars. And it's not for the full amount because the court and jury would recognize that, agents would be paid some amount of money to represent the buyer. But the question is whether it's, 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever the number might be, there's some difference there is what the damages would be. Here's where it gets really complicated. So this is federal court in Missouri. Plaintiffs not only are looking for, money to be repaid back to sellers, but also an injunction to stop buyer broker cooperation immediately. So in theory, worst case scenario, there's actually two worst case scenarios. The first one for Missouri is if the class action status, when they go to trial, if they win, there could be an injunction that states immediately that the buyer's agent will no longer be compensated by the sell side agent. I'm going to go down that rabbit hole in just a minute. Okay. The bigger issue is it's federal court. So technically the judge could take the injunction if he or she felt that it was big enough and damaging enough to consumers and enact that injunction across the entire US. So while what people don't understand is while this trial is in Missouri, specifically for Missouri, the injunction could be enacted across the US. In other words, all 50 states, buyer broker co-op could be essentially, it can no longer be offered. That even can happen during the appeals process. So in all cases, when you have a case, if for instance, the industry lost, we would appeal that and it would go up through the courts and it would take years to solve. But the reality is an injunction could still be upheld during that time frame. So I'm going to stop there real quick, Michael. So you have any questions, and I'm going to go deeper into all of this, but if you want to frame it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's really good. Great job of explaining that, James. Again, anybody watching live, you can type in a question for James, for myself in the comment section. Don't need to download anything. If you're watching a replay of this, you can send me an email to Michael@Marketing Luxury Group. By the way, before I forget, I'll mention it a few times. Again, we have James on. He's CEO of NextHome. They got about 6,000 agents across the world. They just launched their own. You just launched your own podcast, Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered.
We
correct?
did. Yep, we did. We did. Check it out if you want to see some stuff. It's kind of a fun podcast. We're a little Joe Rogan style on it. So a little direct, little candor, a little bit of humor, little profanity. So
all right, hey, that's good. We try to keep it clean here at
I'll keep it clean on yours, but I got mine where
hey,
I get a little bit more juicy.
In my trainings, I'll slip up once in a while. So hey, very good explanation of this. This is in October, although it's happening in Missouri. It could affect us all, no matter where you're listening across the United States. Good.
So then there's two others, and I'm going to really focus on moral, which is the big ones. This is 20 markets across the U.S. The premise is the same. It's essentially a much bigger category of, market share, a much bigger potential damages. Same concept that sellers were harmed by being required, what they say is being required to offer compensation to the buy side agent. So the cases are all fairly similar. There is some differences, but not worth noting, but they're all fairly similar in context. What's important to note here is a couple things. These cases have been going on since 2019. All of them have gotten class action status. That's a very big problem. The issue that we're facing here is I've had a lot of people go, well, if administrations changes, it'll change. This has nothing to do with administrations. This is civil court. So whether it's Democrats or Republicans, there's nothing to do with lobbying or changing things with the Department of Justice. This has nothing to do with the Department of Justice. These are class action suits in civil court. They will go down to a jury of your peers. I want to explain how problematic that is. If it's a jury of your peers who have bought houses, who have used a realtor, or who are renters who think they can't afford a house because the plaintiff's lawyer is going to say that commissions are too high. They'll use examples of other countries around the world where commission rates are lower, comparing apples and oranges, but that's what they'll do. They'll convince a jury that they were harmed and that they didn't have to pay these fees. I am in the camp, and I hope I am dead wrong, that I do not think we are going to win these cases. I do not. I think that we have every single thing our industry has tried to toss these cases to get class action status removed. Even last week, that appeal for getting class action status removed was denied by the judge. These are going to trial. This is going to come down to Katie Johnson and her team at NAR. They're amazing. I have all the faith in the world of them. I just feel like we're in a world where it's a little bit different. You've got a very clear layout of what the plaintiff is going to use. Commission rates in the US are higher than any other developed country on the planet for real estate. They're going to use the policies to show a path. They're going to use the people involved, and they're going to get a jury of people who have bought or haven't, and it's going to be a hard thing to overcome. I want to be clear. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm dead wrong with this. I just don't think this is the reality of how this is going to go.
So,
So,
so let me pause right there. So
yep.
that's part of the reason I have James on today's show is he was on a panel. He really was the one that was vocal on his thoughts on this potentially not turning out in realtors' favor. And so, again, worst case scenario is if you're watching, if you're listening, you need to prepare your business. You need to have unbelievable customer service so that if the buyer's agent co-op disappears and you need to be compensated through a buyer's agent agreement, you need to bring more value to the consumer. Again, in my market, I'm based in the Chicagoland market. There's a shortage of properties. I have buyers. I showed a buyer recently, a $6.5 million property. He signed a buyer's agent agreement that he would compensate me. I flat out said, if I can find you an off-market property that hasn't been sent to you by 5 other agents that you're on their list, and I can provide you your dream home, would you compensate me? I would negotiate. I would represent you. And he said yes. So again, the point being is, if this does come through the pipeline, are you prepared? Are you prepared to bring more value? Or are you just a leasing agent? Are you just opening doors for people and anybody can do that, right? So that's problem with our industry is we have a lot of agents that just do the bare minimum. You have to bring extra service. I call it the Ritz-Carlton white glove service. And so I'll toss it back to you, James, but I wanted to interject there. That's why I have you on. I love your candidness. You know, you're not negative, Nick. You're being in
I'm a
your
dose of reality. Like I said it on stage, hope is not a strategy. So for me, I want to believe that we're going to go there, but we also need to have a plan for if things don't. And so let me dive into that about where this is all going to shake out. So let me start with the bad news. If Burnett, if we lose Burnett in October, what will happen is copycat lawsuits. You have to remember that there's four or five defendants currently in the Burnett case in Missouri. So there's a hell of a lot of other real estate companies that could be sued for the same problem. It's also then set precedents. This trial in October is extremely crucial for the outcome. If we win, then it's going to give us a stronger case against the others. If we lose, I can tell you the others are going to be worse. So what will happen most likely if we win, great. We move on, things continue, and we go to Moral next year. They just said that's going to go to trial in Q2, somewhere right around Q1, Q2. If we lose, what will happen is you're going to see massive amounts of law firms file copycat lawsuits. What that means is essentially they'll do the same case and they'll sue in all 49 other states and they'll sue everybody else as well, because now you've got precedents. You've already shown that this is what the damages are. The lawyers are going to go, oh, wow, we can just go sue everybody. They'll look for settlements, etc. And and this is a worst case scenario. Again, hope I'm wrong. That's my opinions. Talk to your own lawyer. If that does occur, here's the issue. Brokerages across America, big and small, will get looped into these suits. They'll all eventually go into one class, is how it typically work. And, here's the problem. So I've already checked in on this. Insurance companies, your E&O, your general liability, et cetera, will not cover antitrust claims. There's our exclusions in riders in those insurance policies that specifically state if you did something like an antitrust violation, we will not cover you. So my understanding so far, having done the research, is most real estate brokerages have exposure here. You can't change anything because even if you try to change things going forward, you're being sued for the past. You can't change the past. They're going to go back 5 years, and that's what you're dealing with. So the policies themselves, in addition to not covering, you can only make changes going forward. You can't change what you did going backwards, which is what you're going to get sued for. It'll be a pretty significant problem for our industry. Some policies have the ability to cover your lawyer's fees, but I'm not aware of any of them that will cover damages. So there's a big problem. Where this is going to shake out is, I think, and I've been talking to a lot of lawyers on this, the best scenario for this is that these cases get settled. and this is going to be a weird analogy I'm going to explain here. So let's just say the potential damages, I'm going to make up a number for simplistic conversation. It's much larger than this, but let's just use simple math. Let's say the total damages that the industry could afford to do is $1 billion. NAR kicks in money, and Keller and Remax and everybody kicks in cash, and NAR does some sort of assessment on everyone, and we all pay an extra $500 or whatever the number is, right? They come in and say, okay, we'll offer you $2 billion paid out over the course of 3 or 4 years. And what they do, which is where it gets strange, is they open the class up further and invite everybody into it. In other words, you go out and you get as many sellers as possible over the past 5 years to join the class, so that you can get basically everybody into the pot to receive some money for the actions. And that then gets
is that where you see attorneys, they get list of who's bought and sold a home in the last couple of years? They send out postcards, hey, you might be entitled to contact us.
Yeah. You get everybody into the class so that you can essentially remove future lawsuits. So there's always still a sense of risk, because people may not join the class and then they want to file their own suit. It gets reduced because once essentially you've got to do these class action suits. These are big law firms with big amounts of capital. So, the ambulance chasers aren't going to go down that road. Typically, when you open the class up and get as many people in, it basically settles the case out. That is what I would call the best case scenario. And again, I hope I'm wrong. Well, I'm sorry. Best case scenario, if we lose, is we go and do some type of settlement, and we open the class up and we figure out a way to get everybody in and settle the case out. Best case scenario is we win these suits. The worst case scenario is that we lose, there is no settlement, and a judgment is issued for a massive amount of money on all of these firms. And candidly, the only way out of all of that is bankruptcy. And because no one has enough money on their balance sheet for the amount of damages that are here. So I'm not trying to scare everybody. What I'm trying to say is you have to be educated about this. There's a lot of ways this can play out, but certainly there are some significant problems. What I will say is, regardless of this outcome, I do think buyer broker co-op is done. I think you are going to see this be removed. I don't think the future is going to have, essentially, I do not see it being done in its current fashion, where in the MLS you are offering compensation to the buyer's agent. The way that we see this playing out is there's a great case example going on in Northwest MLS. They're not an NAR governed MLS, so they can make changes to the way they govern themselves and operate differently than most of the rest of the industry. They stopped buyer broker co-op requirement over a year ago in their MLS. What's been fascinating about it is it really hasn't shifted a lot. Essentially, the way that this goes, and this is how we see the future ending up. As a seller's agent, you'll meet with a seller. You'll ask them to pay you whatever your compensation is for your services that you're offered. You will not be collecting money to pay the buyer's agent any further. You'll talk to the seller about why it's important to be prepared to offer compensation to the buyer's agent, because depending upon the price of the house and the customer that's going to buy that home, it's likely they will not have the money to be able to afford to pay for that representation. And the buyer's agent's likely going to put that term in the purchase contract. So where this goes is the seller's agent gets paid by the seller, talks to the seller about the importance of offering compensation. And on the buy side, this is where it all changes. Buyer's side agents need to be prepared to ask for a buyer broker agreement and get good at it. Get really good at it. Explain your services. It can't be this subjective, I open doors and do this stuff. It's got to be very specific. Here's the 150 things that I do. Here's the amount of work that's involved. Here's the amount of time that's involved in a real estate transaction. It needs to be, we have to do a better job, because candidly, we suck at articulating our value currently. We just don't do it very well. We also haven't had to do it very well on the buy side because we haven't really had to worry about it. We need to get better about that as an industry. We need to convince a buyer to pay us that. You'll write your compensation as part of the deal terms is where this will likely go. So in the purchase contract, seller needs to pay whatever percent, whatever type of compensation it is that you're asking for as part of the deal structure. And if the seller decides to say no, then the buyer needs to pay that. I will tell you that I am very confident that there is work being done behind the scenes so that eventually that buy side commission could be financed in the loan. There'll have to be changes with Fannie and Freddie, LTV, a bunch of other stuff to make that work. But I do believe that will be coming so that if you ask a buyer to pay it and the seller won't, the buyer can finance that throughout the loan process. So they're not having to come up with the cash. That is where we believe it will go. We think that this is the future. Agents who are very good at articulating their value will thrive as they always have. Agents who are not won't be here. And candidly, that's going to happen anyway, because we're already starting to see the attrition of realtors in the business. So there's a lot of scenarios on where this will play out. What I can tell you is, and this is just an example of what I'm doing internally with our organization, and I encourage everyone to be doing something similar, is we're starting to prepare our people for this. We're going to have a whole summit with our franchise owners to talk about how to restructure things, how to prepare to ask, how to teach your agents this stuff. We're really thinking about, even if we win these suits, we need to be prepared, because there are other levers that can change this policy. At the end of the day, what they want, what they're looking for, the Department of Justice and these civil cases is letting the seller's agent be paid by the seller and the buyer's agent be paid by the buyer. The end. That's what they're looking for. We do that, and candidly, a lot of these investigations by the Department of Justice go away. There's no more, there's very little to sue on anymore. There's got to be some changes to it, but that is where we think the future of this industry will look like.
And what I heard you say, by the way, that the last 3 to 4 minutes was just nugget after nugget for people on how to overcome if this does come through the pipeline, come to fruition. But just for clarity's sake, do you also believe, and again, this is your personal opinion, that they don't want sellers to be forced to pay the buyer's agent? So you gave the scenario where it could be optional,
100%,
but they're not forced to.
And I think you're going to find most sellers will still do that. But I do also think that because of the structure change, you will also see more sellers than we have not do that. And
yeah, I think it comes down to supply and demand, right?
Sure.
In a hot market, you see more for sale by owners. You see more sellers say, I'm not going to paint, I'm not going to stage, I don't need to. In a shifting market, a cooling market, they're more motivated. They have to be more creative. They got to be more flexible.
But our industry has to, and it's another, and you'll hear more about this later this year. It's a project I've been working on, but we have to learn how to change the way we articulate our value. And we can't say I do all of this work, but not quantitatively show it. And that's what I'm really focused on with this new project, is how do we have an agent clearly articulate value and show the buyer, here's the 155 things I'm going to do over the course of 90 days and the 110 hours I'm going to work with you and all of these things. So it's really interesting where I think this will go. But I will make this statement. This sounds a little grim, but I actually think this will be long-term good for our industry. I know that sounds really weird, but here's why I say that. For those of us who've been in the business a long time, we welcome everybody into it. But there are too many people with a license that sell real estate that don't know what they're doing, aren't professional, and just candidly shouldn't be in it. And I think that this makes the industry stronger, because the better agents are going to rise to the top. The people who are hungry, who are consumer focused, who really focus on how to articulate value and show what they do, will continue to garnish whatever compensation they're looking for. They will thrive. Every study has shown that consumers want to work with an agent. It's at the highest level it's been in for a long, long time and continues to be. They question compensation, which we can fix. They want to work with an agent. And we're also dealing with a world where you have to have 2 incomes to live in the United States. Like, mom and dad both have to work. So who the hell has the time to go out and try to sell their own house? So my point is, do I think there'll be a lot less realtors at the end of this? Yes. Do I think there'll be a lot less brokers? Probably. Do I think that there'll be a shakeup of companies? Yeah, to some degree. Certainly there's going to be some shakeup from all of this. But I think in the end, we end up being a more professional business with more professional people, with a much clearer way of articulating our value. And I think our industry just gets better. Do I think there's a lot of pain along the way? Probably. Do I think that, MLSs and associations consolidate because there's less membership? Probably. But I don't see this as the end of real estate. And I'll just give you one example. The agents aren't being sued for this. You can't sue an agent. They're not fiduciary. The brokerage is. So I'm just going to throw out this scenario. If for some reason, worst case scenario happened and everybody got sued, and okay, You file bankruptcy and you just start brokerage B. And you move everybody to brokerage B, and brokerage B has no liability from the past. So like I'm oversimplifying here,
Sure.
but like the concept is there's a new path forward. Plaintiff and defendants both have a reason to settle. Nobody wins if everybody files bankruptcy. That's not what lawyers aren't in the business of not making money.
Right.
So this scenario. If I have a very good friend named Rob Hahn, and I love him. He's a dear friend of mine. He's a little extreme on his views, and he knows that, and I share that with him. You know, his view is it could be really catastrophic, and I don't disagree. It could be, but in the middle of all of this is the reality that at the end of the day, the industry will move forward. It just might look a little bit different.
Yeah.
Or I'm dead wrong. Great. I hope I am, and I'll buy everybody a cocktail, and that'd be great. And you know, we continue on a status quo. In either case, I do think, whether these cases go, you know, one way or the other, I do think buyer broker cooperation is going to change. This is a time bomb that needs to be changed, and I think our industry will be better for it long term once we figure it out. So,
James, a wealth of knowledge. I want to be respectful of your time. CEO of NextHome, 6,000 agents, doing some great things. James has always been approachable. He's a leader in the industry, one of the top 200 most influential leaders in the industry, thanks to Stefan Swanepoel's top 200 list. And please take a listen. His new podcast, Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered. If you ever want to talk luxury, you know where to reach me.
We appreciate that. We'll have you on at some point too, Michael.
No, I appreciate it. You're a wealth of knowledge. I do appreciate you. Thank you for coming on.
Of course.
Not an easy topic to talk about, but that's why I had you on.
Perfect. Hope everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Again, if you're getting value from this episode or previous episodes, please leave us a like, leave us a review. James wasn't compensated. I wasn't compensated. We're trying to raise the bar for the industry. We hope it's entertaining, but we also hope it's valuable. My name is Michael LaFido. Until next time, you're listening to another episode of Luxury Specialist. Take care, everybody.